Hello and welcome to the channel. We've got this Fender Princeton Reverb, and this is a gorgeous sounding amplifier and a bit different to most Princetons, you see. So if we look, we've got volume, treble, bass, reverb, speed, intensity. Pretty simple amp. We've all seen these before. We've got the darker grill cloth there, and this amp is in for just a bit of a check over, really. It's one of Lee's own amps at the shop, so we're going to just draw it out the chassis, check it over, make sure there's no problems. There's supposed to be a slight problem with the tremolo. We'll turn it round and have a look at the back. Yeah, dear, the running thread. So this is a limited edition Princeton. Let's have a look what speaker it's got in the back. It's got a Celestian Gold Alnico in there. Foot switches in there, everything's in there. Thank you, Pink. Right, let's just get this back off, and then we'll get the screws out and just draw the chassis out and have a look. Well, I can tell you that this amp sounds absolutely phenomenal, but having taken it out of the cabinet, I have to say it's a marked disappointment due to the size of the power transformer. And we've got a GZ34 in here. Normally, if you put one of the, when you see a GZ34, it's generally running a couple of 6L6s, and you generally see a 5Y3 running a couple of these 6Vs. But that's a very tiny transformer. So we've got 6V6S's. Thank you, Pink. We're busy. We've got 6V6S's there. They're JJ's. GZ34 rectifier tube. And then we've got these are all JJ's as well. We've got in here, that is 12AX7 or ECC83S, as that is in there. Again, ECC83S, 12AX7. Oh, I've got a Mullard in there, ECC81 Mullard. That'll be for the reverb. And another ECC83. So that's the tube compilation, if we'd like to call it that. Right, we'll turn it over and have a look at the gubbins. Right, so we're looking inside, and yes, so we've got the IC caps there, the grey ones. Need to really see if we can find a date for this amp, really. Got the diodes on the rectifier tube socket there, so that's good. 3 caps here, which will be just bypass caps. They'll be 22 microfarad, those. The first two will anyway. So we've got 22 at 500, 22 at 500, 22, they're all 22s then. So I'll probably be whipping those out and putting something nice in this amp, because it is a really nice bit of kit. The sound of this is just gorgeous. Don't see much else really wrong in this amp. Got another cap here. Is that for the bias circuit? Probably. Let's have a bit of a test. ESR 3.2 ohms, 22.6. So yes, the ESR is it's not bad, but 3.4. 3.8. So they're not the best caps in the world. Let's try this one on the end. Three ohms ESR 22.13. And that's what we'd expect to see really from a new capacitor, although this is a 47, but even so. And these are, you know, these are really good caps. That or they're not that particularly expensive, and they've as regards testing, they easily match up to the F&Ts. Whether they'll last as long is another question, of course. But we probably will put F&Ts. Sorry, we probably will put F&Ts in this amp. Probably still some life in those. I think they're not wonderful caps. I mean, they know that they had a bad batch of them in the around, I don't know, early 2000s, 2010, somewhere around that era. Forget now, it's a while ago. And a lot of them were failing. Right, so this amp actually is a Fender Princeton 65 FSR Ash in 3-tone Sunburst. Yes, it is pink. It's also set at 230 volts. So we need to find a schematic for it, because we need to change this over, assuming there's a tapping on the transformer. That looks like a Fender Blues Junior transformer at a glance. It's about the same size. Let's plug it in, and before we do that, obviously we've got to get rid of pink. So I'm going to feed her and put her outside for a bit. The weather's mild, and if we put a bit of grub outside, she'll go out and we'll get rid of her. So I'm just going to see what plate volts we've got on this. I'm curious really to see what we've got. So we'll power on. Let's wait for the GZ34 to warm up, and we should start to see a bit of voltage, and there we go. We don't need the current limiter on because this amp's been run very recently. It's a good bit of voltage. It's coming down though. Tubes are conducting. Well, the tremolo's working, you can hear it. So we've got about 450 volts, 450 plate voltage there. So that rectifier's well on top of its job. And it's creeping up. We're at 240 volts on the wall, and we're getting 454-ish volts out of this. So that's it. So that's just the camera. That's a good bit of voltage on the output tubes, that is, and they're very cool as well. Still virtually feel cold, so I'm guessing this is biased quite cool. Well, there we go. So we know roughly what plate volts we've got. That will reduce, of course, if we change it to 240. So you have to be a bit careful with some of these amps, not, you know, any of these modern amps, not just the Fenders. Is you've got such a small power transformer on a lot of them, and you've got to be careful how you bias these. What they're doing now in modern amps, they're biasing them cool below 70% to get around, you know, having to put a really decent transformer on there, which is a bit naughty. So let's see what we've got on the filaments now to give me some idea. While we're up to 200, nearly 240 volts, I'm going to quickly check the filaments. 6.5 on the filaments there, so probably this has been changed over then. I wonder if someone's already done this amp at that. Could explain. 6.5. I wonder if someone has changed this over. Don't know on that one. Right, so ready centre tap on the output transformer. So we'll measure one side for the resistance. And we've got 139.5 ohms there. So we'll write that down. Not too... now we need to find out which tube that is as well. So if I go into there, let's check the other one first, which is Brune. 138.4. That's a pretty close match. So they're about to ohm out, so that's pretty good. So we'll just put the colours down. So that's blue and brown. So that's our impedance readings. We'll switch back on again. Right, let's check each side of this transformer then. So we'll start with blue. And blue is 1.26 to be precise. And now we'll test Brune. .5. And now we need our plate volts. So this amp's fixed bias, so we can do it from ground. Sorry, there on blue. 456 is our plate volts. So let's start with blue. So we have 1.26, and we divide that by 139.5, which will give us our current. 9 milliamps. I said those twos were cold, didn't I? How long's this amp been on now, on and off? It's been run. I can still put my hands on these tubes. They're no more than lukewarm. I tell you what, this amp, for an amp that's biased so cold, it does sound very nice. So yeah, I'd expect those twos to be running at around about 24 milliamps, something like that. So that's really low. You can actually see that on there, 0.09. Just tap that, 0.099 milliamps. So let's do the maths on the other side then. So 1.5 divided by 138.4, that's got 10 milliamps on that side. You can see 10 milliamps. So yeah, that's that tube is biased at 4.9 watts, which is way too low. Unless you want to get about 200 years of use out of it. and 9 milliamps is even less, 4. I'm getting 4 watts out of that one. So that's not very good. That's not set up very well at all. This thing's drifted again, the shade. So yes, that's something else we need to look at. Right, we're just looking at this voltage selection part of the schematic here. And if we look, everything on here is the same except for P8 and P17. So if we look at the 230 volt, so if we look at the 230 volt wiring, P8 is white, P17 is white black. If we look at the 240 volt wiring, P17 is white and P8 is white black. So let's check the amp and see which setting the amp is wired to. Right, so P17 and P8 are here. So this is P17, and you can see that that is white black there, and this is P8 is white. So that's telling us that this is still wired to 230 volts and not as I thought. So all we have to do is switch these two wires around and it's wired to 240. That's all you have to do, switch those two around. I'm going to power the amp up now and see what sort of plate volts we've got. And you can see that's dropped considerably. Now let's look at the filament voltages. 6.1 on the filaments at 234 volts. And that is Henchman Dregs drinking his water. So you can see that's a considerable drop. So the plate voltage before was 456. So if we just go in and check it now, the plate voltage, oops, put it on DC, the plate voltage is 433 now. Right, it's nearly 1 week later, and I was going to make this a assessment video, but in the meantime the capacitors have arrived. And the reason it's been nearly a week is my father's been ill again, and I've had to look after him. But he's on the mend now, so we're back on it. And now we've got the caps, we'll just crack on and get this done, because it's already on the bench and in the cradle. So we've got to get this board out, haven't we? I've had a look on the schematic, which we could have a gleg at later, and it has these tubes, these output tubes down for 23 milliamps for the biasing. However, when I did the maths on that, it came out a little over 70%, and with that transformer we certainly don't want to be going over that. So we'll get this board out, and to do that we need to first of all remove these and this. So we've got those out, and we're going to tip this board this way. So I'm going to turn this round in the cradle once I actually get this out. So we've got a screw, 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 and screw, and then another screw there, another one there, another one there, and another one there. They didn't mean that coming out, did they? So we'll get those screws out, and then we need to disconnect the bias, we need to undo the bias pot underneath, and just flick the nut off, pull that out. So that's that. We've got a ground on here, you can't see that, so if we just go over, there we go. We've got a ground wire here. You can see that going onto the board there. And yes, it is unplugged. Obviously, we're taking it to bits. And then we are going to have to take these off here. And possibly these as well to get this board up. I think we are. So we'll just take all of those off. And then we've got wires here, which are the output transformer primary connections. So those will have to be removed, or will they? Maybe, I don't know, maybe not, because we are tipping it this way. These will though, definitely. Then we've got 3 wires here, which I think are the output transformer secondaries, I think. Is that right? Oh no, there's the reverb. Duh, it's the reverb. So that one's the reverb there. I bet you're all shouting at the screen. It's the reverb. So when you're filming though, you see, all your focus goes on inside and you're not looking at the transformers underneath. The secondaries for the output transformer are there. Duh. So we'll make a start. First thing we'll do is we'll get these off. Like so. Oh, he doesn't want to come off, does he? I bet he, oh, sorry about that. Just caught the camera with me arm. There. I think we'll get, we'll just write down where these go. It just makes sense and it's easier. We'll take that ground out as well. So that's that. And we'll pop the screw back in the wheel, and then we won't lose it, will we? Or we'll try to anyway. That is magnetised. There we go. If we pop him back in there, then we won't lose him. So we need a notepad, don't we? And here's one I've prepared earlier. And we need a pen. That's very posh. Bit different to my usual pens. So let's have a look then. We have P10, which is green. And they are, I think they're the filaments, you know. Yes, they are, because I can see the R1 and R3 are the virtual centre tap 100 ohms, and I can see them protruding in there. You may be able to see them too. If I put it on manual focus, it'll be even better. Yes, and then the other one is P9. So they're AC, so they'll go either way round, but one's shorter than the other anyway. So we take those off. We'll have to take that one off to see what that is. And that one is, does that say P1? Someone has very kindly left us a spot of glue over that. But I think that's P1, and I'm going to put it down as P1. And then we've got, actually that's P2, not P2. Did I say that was P22 earlier? P2 yellow. Yellow. And then we've got P11, which is red yellow, which doesn't want to come off. And there we go, P11. It's a bit of a knotting of wires here, so I think when we lift the board we're going to be pushing against all of that, and So I think what we'll do is we'll snip off that tie wrap, being very careful not to catch the wires. There we go. I think we might, we'll see how we go with that. We've got those off, got that off. That is P14, that is blue, and that is P13, and that is red, which is centre tap, and that is P12, which is brown. Some of these, you know, when you put the ball back, it's obvious where they go because of the way that they've been put through the tie wrap. They can only go in one print. So for instance, brown can't go over here. So yeah, the other way to do it is take photographs. Of course you can do that. Schematics are pretty good on these Fenders though, so usually, you know, if you do mess up and you've kind of got something wrong, you can quickly go to the schematic. They're usually pretty good. So I think we'll take these off as well, so we're not wrestling with them. So let's have a look what we've got here. So we've got P6, have we got there? P6. And P6 is oblique. That's good. P5 is green. P3 is red. P4, fail. P4 is blue. That's good. So we shall proceed to get these off now. And I'm afraid I may have to get the pliers on those because of the old thumbs. I hate doing this with the pliers, but I'm afraid it has to be done. There we go. They've come off easy with the pliers. There's another thing with these pliers that I use, they've usually got the knurled lines through them. These haven't, they're smooth, so they tend not to do damage like the others do. As you crimp down, they tend to mark and damage things, but those ones are pretty good, they don't. So that's that. Now we've just got to get the bias pot out under there, and we need a socket for that. So what we'll do is we'll pop him on there and pop him on there, then we won't lose him. The job is a squirrel, as we used to say years ago, before political correctness took over, and now that saying is known as squirrelist. But remember, we don't do politics on this channel. It's amazing the amount of topics that have "ist" on the end, and wondering where it will all end. So, for instance, someone who doesn't like tube amps could be known as a tubist. Someone who doesn't like radial caps could be known as a radialist. And someone that doesn't like me could be known as a plankist. But then there are some ists that are perfectly acceptable, for instance being a herbalist. And then of course there's most of us, and we are just the normalists, which is very simple. It makes life very easy. But that's enough waffling while I'm taking these screws out. So the last 2 minutes there was known as talking random rubbish, which is something that I have qualifications in. Anyway, let's get this board out. It's looking good. There we go. So what we've got to do now is take the amp out of the cradle and turn it around, which is what I'm going to do now. It's very light, this amp, as well, which tells you that there's not much iron. So there we go. Let's have a look underneath, see if it all looks most delightful. 100 microfarad at 100 volts. There we go. We can see that now. So I don't know why the manual focus has gone off again. So there, that's pretty good. Now there's been a bit of an update with the gumption. So apparently gumption is still manufactured, and it's now manufactured in Australia. And we're going to take a look at the latest gumption. Well, a picture of it at least, anyway, because Australia is a very long way to go and fetch a tin of gumption. However, it's no longer in a tin, it is now a tub of gumption. I don't mean those two coming out, and I might have to move the camera to get those out because they might require a little bit of swage. Right, I'll get those two out. We'll start cleaning off this silicone, and then we can start and get the new caps in, can't we? Not a lot in this amplifier, but I say one thing, it does sound very good. Right, I've got all the caps in, and I've not filmed all of that because we've filmed enough of that. So just have a look what we've got. So we've got the F&Ts in there. We've replaced the bias cap there, 100 microfarad at 100 volts. And we've got the 22s in. And yes, they're radials, they're absolutely fine. And I'm not a radialist, so I like radial capacitors. Obviously, if this was a hand-wired amp, I wouldn't put those in, but they're perfectly fine in here. So that's that. And I want to focus really more on... So what's left to do on this amp? Well, we're going to run it up again and just make sure everything's okay. We're going to fire it up on the bulbs, bring these up slowly, and then we're going to look at changing the tubes in this, not because they need changing or anything, because they're tired, but we're going to put some of these in. And the reason for this is, so these have a dissipation of 12 watts. These are like Russian V6s. In fact, rumour has it that all the old Brymer tubes were actually Russian tubes, the Brymer 6V6s, and that's probably true, but just what I've gleaned reading up. But anyway, so we're going to pop those in, and the reason is because they dissipate at 12 watts, they'll break up a bit sooner. Lee doesn't really gig, well, it doesn't gig at all. So, you know, this amp's got 6V6S's in that dissipate at 14, so we can bias this amp at 70%. We'll have less current on the transformer because it's not very big, and it should break up a little sooner with those in there. These are from 1974, new old stock. So we're going to fit those in. We're going to run this up first, and then we're going to pop those in and bias it up. Now it recommends 23 milliamps, per tube on the schematic, but with the voltages on the schematic, I did the maths on that, and it comes out at a little more than 70%, although this amp, if you remember, was biased at about 4 watts, which is way too low. And I do wonder if someone's turned the bias down because the transformer was getting too hot. Don't know whether anybody has been in here before. There is a couple of diodes on the rectifier tube. I'll have to see if they're on the schematic. That would give us a bit of a clue to see if someone's been in here. There's no other evidence of any repairs though, or anything being changed. So we'll fire it up and I'll start waffling, and we'll just make sure everything's okay. We're ready to go. We've got a 40-watt bulb in there. We just need to put a meter on. Let me just switch off a minute. We'll just forgot to put the meter on. We can monitor the voltage. I'm just going to watch this voltage coming up, and we've got the current. The current on there is 110 milliamps. Just started up. Obviously, the bulb is some of that. Bulb's nice and dim, so that's looking good. Got 142 volts going into the amp off the wall. You can see the voltage beginning to go up now. Voltage is dropping off the wall now, 138 and dropping. Couple 100 volts on there plus. All looking good. So you can hear Pink at the back door there because she knows I'm filming, and when I'm filming she wants to be in on the action, but unfortunately we've got this plugged in, so she isn't allowed on the bench. So we're now going to go up on the bulbs, so we'll put another 60 in there, so we've got 100. I can hear the amp now, very quiet. $198 volts going into it. We've got 345 upstairs. There. So all is looking good. So we'll put 100 in with the 60. So we've got 160. Then we're just about there now. 216 volts. Oops. 216 volts. 385 going into it. So that's pretty good. That 60 out, put a 150 in, so we've got 250 watts of current limiting, and we're at 231 volts there, so we're at 232, so we're about right with that. 417 volts. I think we can come off the current limiter. Yes, we can, and that gives us 427 volts. We just go upstairs and have a look at 250 milliamps going up there. But remember, this amp is biased quite cool, and these tubes are cold. Even I can put my hands on those, even in the centers of those tubes, they're so cold. So all looks good there. 240 milliamps draw. Amp's fine. Tremolo's working. I did just reflow the pots, suck the unleaded solder off the pots there, and reflowed those. Right, what we'll do now, and that just shows how cold those tubes are. I can actually just take them out. They're running so cold. I can just take those out. You know how quick tubes get hot. Look at that. They're stone cold. Well, they're not stone cold, but they're only lukewarm. So now we're going to put in the Russian tubes, and there's nothing wrong with those 6V6S's. They'll come in useful for another amp. You've got these lousy burr traps on these sockets. You're staring at that meter, aren't you? Sorry about that. There we go. So pop those in, they're in, and we're going to bring those up on the bulbs as well, because you never know whether they're new tubes, new old stock or whatever. You just don't know what, whether they're going to perform right, whether they're going to run away or anything. So we'll let's just plug it in on the wall. So we'll bring them up steady. There we go, just turn the tremolo off. This amp is silent. Absolutely, it's flat out now. But obviously its bias so cool that there's not a deal of gumption coming out of it. Now another thing I want to just show on here. So a watcher of the channel was asking me about this multimeter that I use, this Mastech, and asking me what, because obviously, you know, everybody's at a different level. Some people are just starting out doing this type of stuff, and some people have been doing it some years. So basically he was asking me about the plugs on this meter. So if we take these out, you can see two of them are lit up, and that depends on what settings we've got on here. So at the moment, if we're on ohms or AC or DC, and there's a few other settings on there, and whichever are marked, the diode test for instance there is marked, and so on. Capacitance, although I don't use that on here, and so on. So you need to plug your red lead into the one with the choices on there. So it's got ohms, diode check, all the ones we've gone through, and then we've got a common. So common is always the black wire, which is what we always put to ground when we're testing. The other two on here, this is for milliamps, HFE, and whatever else settings belong to that. And then we use common again. So we'd use common with that one, depending on the settings. So for instance, for, again, I don't milliamps there. You can see now these two have lit up there, common and this one. And then for amps, you would use, for up to 10 amps, you would use common, and then you've got this one here. So common is always the black wire, that always goes to ground, unless of course you're measuring current, then it'll go between the 2 points where you're measuring the current, or it'll go to one of those points and the red will go to the other point, should I say. So that's basically how those work there. Right, I'm not always the best at explaining these things, but that's basically how that works. Now we need to bias this amp now. Let's just have a feel of these tubes. Now the one thing, these are a little warmer, and if we look upstairs at the meter, you can see that we're drawing about 7 volts more than we were before, which tells us these tubes are drawing a little more current. Now what we've got to be careful of, well, this is why we keep that meter on there, we're looking for runaway, as we are with any new tubes, and this happens all the time. You get some brand new tubes, you buy them and they just start running away. One of them will be running away. It's so we always, and we have still got them. So you can see we're still on the bulbs. We've got 323 volts. I've just stuck in another 150 to bring that up. and we'll have the other 150 in now. Just see where we're going with that. Now we're up to 400 volts there. I'm just going to keep a bit of an eye on that. So let's come off the current limiter and we'll just watch these tubes. Now you can see the difference there is that now we've only got 410 volts. We had about 430 before. That is because these tubes are drawing current. They're just drawing more current. What we need to watch is that voltage. If it begins to dip, then it'll tell us that one of the tubes is running away. It does happen with new tubes. So 412. Now what I want to do is with this amp, this is why I didn't really film much of the capacitor, because we've done quite a lot of that, fitting the caps. What I want to do is concentrate on biasing this amp and showing people how we do that. So these here are the transformer primaries, and we've got center tap, and then we've got each side of the transformer which goes to the plates on the tubes there. And these are pretty easy to do the readings on the bias, because you can just measure off the spade terminals and not off the tube pins, so you're not getting between all the other pins on the tubes there. So we've got red here, and red is center tap, and then we've got blue and brown here, and we need to measure the resistance of them. And I thought I'd actually done that when before we started this amp. I thought we'd measured those when we did the bias the first time. I wonder what I did with those. With those, we'll have to measure them again then, won't we? We can do that. I don't know whether I've been through that earlier in the video. So what we're going to do to start off with, we're going to take some readings. Now we need to take a voltage drop across each side of the transformer. You've seen me do this before on lots of amps, just not on this one. So we'll just turn the volume down on the amp as well. So always put the volume to 0 when you're doing this. So we've got center tap and we've got this one. What we need to know is which of these is to which tube though. Because if we have to remove one of these for any reason, because for instance, they may not match up. I'll fetch these, they're not a match pair, and I've got lots of these tubes, so we can actually try and match a pair up should these two not match. So we'll go to center tap, which is red, and then we'll go to brown, which is the plate of one of the tubes, and that is 2.2 volts I've got on that meter, and you can just see that if I move my mitts. 2.2 volts on there. So we're going to write that down, and now we'll check the other one. And we've got only 1.6 on there, so that's telling us that those tubes are not matched, I'm afraid. And if I remember, this transformer was pretty well balanced, pretty well matched on the resistance. So we're going to switch off now. So we'll switch off there, and we're going to let the voltage drain out of it. And we can check that on the meter upstairs. We'll look up there, and you can see it's coming out now. They're going down now, the voltage coming out of the amp. That's what we want. So we'll wait till that gets down pretty low. Now what we're going to do is measure the resistance across each side of the transformer. And to do that, we're going to go from center tap, which is red, and then to brown. We should get a resistance reading on that meter, which should just be able to see if I just go on there. You can see that. give it a minute to settle. We've got 140 ohms there. So let's go to blue. And we've got 141. Come. 140.6 for blue. So 140 would be near enough, and then 140 for brown. So they're pretty well. That's a pretty well matched transformer there. Pretty well matched. So now we've got those figures. What we need to do, we need to find out which one of these is which for which tube, don't we? So let's look at what we've got on here. And if you look at the meter now, we've got continuity there, 0, 0, 0.0. Now if we go on to blue, you can see we get a resistance reading there. And the reason for that is because we're now measuring across each side of the transformer, but not from centre tap. So when we measure centre tap to one side of the transformer, we're measuring half of it. But now we're measuring all of it. But in other words, we're measuring both windings together. 279. So that tells us that brown has to be the left tube there. And now if we measure across brown and blue, you can see we've got the 0, 0 again there. Sorry, we've got the 208 in there, because that's the same reading as we get from there. And if we go to blue, to there, we get the 280 odd ohms. And if we go to there on both pins, look, so now we're on blue and brown, which are each side of the transformer, there's the 280. And now if we go from blue to the right tube, pin 3, you can see we've got the zeros, which is, oops, hang on, I'm slipping off there. You can see there we've got the zeros, which we should have. So that's how you identify which one of these spade terminals goes to which tube. So brown is the left and blue is the right. And although they're positioned like that, don't ever take that as normal, because it may not be the case with PC boards. So brown is the left tube, and that's obviously as we're looking at it front facing. And that's there. So now we know which tube is which, and that's important, because if one tube's drawing more current than the other, we need to know which one to swap. So let's do the maths on that then. So let's start with brown, which was 2.2, and we need to divide that by our 140 volts. So that comes out at 15.7 milliamps. If we times that by, I think we had about 413, didn't we? That's 6.4. So higher than the others. They're drawing more current, or at least that tube is, but still lower than we need the 8.4, which is what we're looking for. Now let's try the other one, which is 1.6 divided by basically 140.6 equals, that's coming out at 11.3 milliamps. So if we times that roughly by that, I think it was 413 we got on there, there's only 4.7 watts. So that tube on the right is drawing about the same current as those 6V6S's. The other one is drawing a smidgen more, in fact considerably more, well not considerably, 4.6, 9, so 4.7 watts against 6.8, so nearly 2 watts difference there with those, near enough. So we need to remove one of those, and we'll start by removing the blue aside. We'll just call that the blue one. It's easier. And we're going to find another tube to go in there. Right, find another tube, put that in. Let's see if we've got a bit closer match this time. So let's have a look. Go from there to there. Got 1.6, and if we go to here, we've got 1.9. So a bit closer that. But we need to turn this up, this bias, because we know that's nowhere near enough. So we'll wind the bias up and see what I think we're looking for about 3 volts, you know, getting on for between 2.5 and 3. .9 and 2.3. So let's wind it up a bit more. Now we're down to about 405 volts on the plate. .2, 2.6. We're going to run out before we get the bias in. At this rate, we've run out. There's nothing left on the pot. 405 on the plate, and 2.2 on there, 2.6 on there. So let's go for the highest one. 2.6 divided by 140 is 18.4 milliamps. So we know we're still under. Times 405. So 7.4, so we're a watt under there on that. And what did we say the other one was? 2.3 or something. 6.65. So they're less than a watt, about 0.8 of a watt out. So they're not bad, but we don't have enough bias voltage to get those to 70%. Right, so we're looking at the bias circuit chassis here. And we can see that if we look, we have a 27k resistor R2, and that is in parallel, sorry, it's in series with the 10k pot, which only actually measures 8.53k. So R2 27k. But if we look in the amp, and which is a bit further along here, and I've had to turn that the top light out, because so I'll just turn that, just turn that back on. But if we look here, we've got 30k in there. That's the problem. So to get more, the more you increase this resistor, the more bias volts you get, because less of that bias volts is going to ground. Because if we look on the schematic, that resistor there, and sorry about that, just tip that out, 27k, and you can see if we go along here, it's going to ground. So the lower we make that resistor, the more of the bias volts is going to ground, and therefore the less bias volts, the hotter the tubes run. So that's the problem. That's the wrong value, and it's not as per what's on the schematic. So unfortunately, because of that discrepancy, which just one of those things, we're going to have to get this board out and do that properly. Now I could topside repair it, but as you know, there's nothing wrong with doing that. As you know on the channel, I just don't do that. And the thing is, it's quite near the edge. It will take me well, I'll let you into a little secret. So you know what it's like when your eyes aren't great. I recap this and put the board back in, and when I got the board back in, I discovered that I'd not changed one of the bypass capacitors, and I cut them all out. And when I looked, and I'd got a better pair of glasses on, and I looked and realised that I'd forgot to change one of these, so I had to take the board out again, obviously. And I got this board out, and got that capacitor back in, because I've done this once, and obviously I'm used to taking boards out, I'd done that within 10 minutes. I took the board out, changed it, put that capacitor in, put the board down, and put it all back together in 10 minutes. So I'm not too fussed if I've got to take these screws out to change that. It's going to take me 10 minutes. The first time I took this board out, it took me longer, because when you're first taking them out, you've got to be careful. You've got to plan out what you need to take off. You've got to look for anything potentially that could get damaged, or any wires that could come off, such as these wires here. That, you know, they're not too flimsy on this one, but they've been soaked in silicone. So, you know, but what you tend to find is a lot of these type of amps, if they're not, you've lifted the board up and down a few times, getting the caps in, one of these has broken off. So before you take the board out, you've got to be looking at that sort of thing, take a few photographs, look at what we remember, we looked to see what needed coming off here on the power side there, and just look, generally be really careful when you're taking it out. But once you've done it once, it's, you know, then everything what's got to come off and what hasn't. In actual fact, I actually got away with not taking these off. I had to take these three off. We just go across there. The last time I just took these 3 off, and these stayed on, and I was okay with it. But if you're taking it off for a first time, I suggest you do take off what we took off before, because obviously then these wires, they've been cut out, the tie wraps, they've been pulled off, and when they go back on, there's a little bit more give in them than they were before we took it out the first time. More waffle there. But yes, didn't have to take these off either here. So it won't take me long. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to snip out that resistor, and we're going to get a 27k resistor to go in there. Now, if you're doing this, obviously you need to get the right resistor before you take the board out. So if we snip this resistor, thank you very much, Pink. We don't require your services on the bench today. And we're messing with this amp, and we will have it turned on at some point. Now, it's no good complaining, you know the rules. Off you go. So we snip it there, and we snip it there, and we remove him. And we need the pliers. Have you got my pliers, Pink? And what we do is we're just going to straighten these up like so. If we can get to that one, there, just lift him up. That's it. And he's actually, we're going to have to move that wire, because we're going to burn it if we do when we're soldering. Oh dear, I know what I've done wrong there. I've put that around the outside of that, and it really should have gone through the inside. That's a bit of a fail on my part, so we're going to change that, because that's not up to par. You can't see what I'm doing now, can you? I'm only taking the ground off anyway. It's nothing major, so we'll take that off. We'll put that round there like so, round that side, and pop him back on again. That keeps it away from those resistor terminals. Now we're going to solder onto those temporarily. Now you can jumper onto those, and then with some jumper, you know, some jumper leads, and connect the resistor on. I don't recommend doing that, because these are very thin, and should the lead come off, the tubes will say hasta la vista baby, and they will go up, because you'll instantly have no bias voltage on them, and they will be all over. So we're going to just tack onto there. Now some people would topside repair that. You can do that, but in my opinion there isn't enough lead to do that correctly. There just isn't, and they're too thin and flimsy, so I wouldn't recommend doing that in this occasion. Take the board out, do it right. When it's something critical like bias, you know, if it's a bypass cap or something like that, and let's just say this bypass cap, let's just say you were modding it and you wanted to change this bypass cap, and you jump it in a few until you found one you liked, and then you top-sided that's no big deal, because if that doesn't connect properly, or it comes off, or it's just going to affect the sound of the amp. But if that comes off, then it's good night Vienna for the tubes, and it could also be good night Vienna for the power transformer as well, or the output transformer, because when the current will go up massively when that bias voltage disconnects, which means it's drawing excessive current on the output transformer, and it could blow that as well. So it's always best to solder them in properly in that case. But enough waffling, let's go and find a resistor. Right, so I actually found a 24k. Now bearing in mind this pot's maxed out, so we'll try 24k in there. Now you can see I've tacked that in. I've just made a couple of curls, dropped them over those things, and that's how, over those leads that are sticking out, and that's how most people do top side. Now I've left quite a bit of length on this, because obviously we're going to cut the legs back and use the resistor again if it's okay. Be careful if you're doing this not to let this resistor catch on to the grounds on that capacitor, because if the live side of that catches, it will immediately ground that resistor out, and your tubes will again say hasta la vista. So keep it away from there. Now the first thing to do is to turn the bias pot right down cold, which we've done. So the bias, we've got maximum volts going to the plates now, maximum negative volts going to the plates, and that's turned down cool. So now we are going to switch back on again, and like so. And now I'm going to quickly, just got the bulbs on there, and I'm just going to quickly check that we've got negative volts on those plates, and we have got negative 38. So we can take it off the bulbs now, but I would, to be honest, if there'd have been no bias voltage on it, the bulbs would have been as bright as anything, and they didn't even light up. So it's obvious we got bias voltage. It's just a case of how much. We've got negative 38. Now on the schematic it says negative 40, I do believe, for the 23 milliamps that we've got. Let's just check that on Bully's prize board. Ding. See if we can get that in focus. Doesn't want to focus. There we go. Somewhere coming in. Let's have a look. There we go, 23 milliamps, and we can measure it at that point if we want, but I don't. I always do it with Ohm's law, measuring across the transformers. So we are actually that resistor may be just a smidging. Oops, sorry. That resistor may be a smidging too small. Let's see. Bearing in mind the bias is cold now. Let's just see what we've got going across. Brown, 1.7. No, it's not. What we got on this side, 2 volts. So only 0.3 out. So no, so that might work really well then, and that actually might work better than the 27. Right, let's go up with the bias then. Oh, that has made quite a difference now. Just seems to be all the adjustment seems to be at the end of the pot. Yes, now we're at 3.3 there, so I'm guessing that's a little bit too high, but we'll try it. Remember, we're looking for about 23 milliamps. Divide by 140, and that's 23.5 milliamps. So actually, that's about right. And we're at 239 volts on the mains, so that is about right, I think. So if we times that by 380. That's 8.9, so we are a little bit over as I thought, but not much at all really. So we'll just give that a little tweak, like so. I did say 3 volts, and I think that's probably what we're looking for, 3 volts. 2.5 to 3, I said. That's come down a little, not enough. Let's go a bit more. I'm going to go for 3 volts of the track. There we go, 3 volts. 3 divided by 140 is, that's 21.4 milliamps times 386. That's 8.2. That'll do me. I've got a little bit more on the other side. 3.4. 0.4. Right. 24 milliamps. Yes, 9.26. And this is what happens as these tubes, the bias gets hotter, they get a little bit more out of balance. So, but we're not too bad. So we got what, 8.2 and 9.2. So we're a watt out, really. That's acceptable. That's acceptable. I say some people don't like matched tubes. That's more than acceptable. It's fine at that. But what we'll do is we'll just tweak it down a little bit now, because as I say, that is a bit too high. 9.2. So we're just going to bring it down a little more and get that into a window. So it'll probably be then, yeah, let's see what we get now. Need to go on to blue, don't we? Yeah, blues. So we need to get that down to 3 volts ish, I think. .1, I think that'll do us. .22 milliamps. 8.7. So that'll do. Let's just see what we've got on the other side, just for the sake of it. And we've got 2.68 on there. And we've got 7.5 on there. That's about right. That'll do. That's near enough for me. So that's biased. Now what we need to do is just whip the board out. That'll take me 10 minutes. I'm going off for some lunch, and then I'm going to come back, whip this board out, change that resistor, and we're finished. Right, we've got that resistor in there, you can see, and just go in there. You can see that's looking good, and that's all done now, all finished. So we'll get it in its case and give it a blast. Right, so we've got the Princeton all back together again, and it's sounding very delightful. I have had a bit of a blast on it and got a bit carried away and lost for time. It is a really nice amp. So let's have a listen. A little rusty there, but you get the idea. So yes, so this reverb is quite splendiferous when you turn it up. Wow, very overkill that. So number 5. But it's I generally have it on about number 2, or perhaps just a shade more than that. Let's have a listen to the old tremolo. Put a bit more in, a bit more intensity. everything like that. So that's it. That's all sounding most delightful. It really does sound gorgeous, this amp. It's really great. So there we go. If just changed the caps, wasn't a big job, and put a different set of tubes in it, and biased it, sorted a few bits out, and there we go. So that'll do it for this one. So thanks for watching, and you all take care, and I'll see you all in the next one. Bye bye for now.